I've never actually talked on this ever in church, um, but I really think that it's something to think about, something to talk about, and it's spiritual depression, what I'm calling spiritual depression. I say I'm calling it that. I'm not the person who came up with that term. To me, one of the greatest Bible teachers who ever lived was a man named Martin Lloyd-Jones. He died, 2 or 3 decades ago. And he was actually a doctor, a very renowned doctor. I think he was a doctor to the royal family or something like that. And then the Lord called him to missionary work. His story's amazing. He left this, what most people would consider an amazing, successful life as one of the highest paid doctors in Europe. And he gave it all up and went and became a missionary, and then ended up becoming a pastor of a church about 7 years later. And long story short, he actually did a 23 sermon series on spiritual depression, and I would recommend it to any of you if you've ever thought about that or struggled with depression or have questions about what spiritual depression is. So he did a 23-part series on it. He ended up being the minister of a famous church. I can't remember the name of it right now. I guess he was a pastor for probably 40 years, and he done this 23-part series on spiritual depression after he had been a pastor for 20 to 30 years. So it's a very insightful thing. And he covers just a plethora of passages from the Bible that I will not be able to even touch upon today. But, well, first let me say, why do I call it spiritual depression and not just depression? Because there is a difference. And as Christian people, we try to be spirit-filled, spirit-minded people. And one of the greatest myths, it seems to me, that's perpetuated among churches and church people, preachers are the worst at perpetuating this myth, and that is this idea that once you're saved or once you're a Christian, everything is just going to be happy and perfect and good all the time. And they have this, they stand behind the pulpit and they say things like, you should just be filled with joy all the time. And I understand why they say that, because it's true of all people in the world. Christian people have more to be happy about. We have more to be filled with joy over. We have more to celebrate. We have more to be thankful for. But at the same time, it is also true, and I'll quote Martin Lloyd-Jones a little bit on this. If the research is true, Christian people as a category of people actually struggle with depression more often than non-Christian people do. And there's a reason for that. And that is because we typically hold ourselves to higher standards, which is good, and we should. But because we have high expectations, because we know the truth in a sense, things weigh heavier upon us. Because we discern between righteousness and wickedness, things weigh heavy upon us. Like, even today, maybe there's a guy on the river down there in a boat fishing, and he feels no sense of guilt or anything about him not being at church. And I'm not saying that being at church is a must. I don't mean that. I just mean if you start to think about these things, you can realize that Christian people, we do hold ourselves to high standards. And because of that, very often, Christian people, the most genuine Christians there are, actually struggle with the feelings of failure on a daily basis, because they do understand the truth. They do know the truth. They have high expectations for themselves, which leads to very often feelings of just failure. And today, I'm only going to cover 3, maybe 5. I've got 7 listed people who did struggle with what I would say a spiritually driven depression. Their depression was not merely because something bad had happened, but it was something bad had happened, whether it's tragedy or feeling like there was a failure in their ministry, as David did at a time and Elijah did at a time. But when you combine that with the fact that they at times may feel like they're letting God down even. They said something that a Christian deals with. Non-Christian people do not deal with that. And so I'm going to cover just a few of them. I don't know how many I'll get to, and I'm not even, let me say this too, I'm not going into great detail over these men's experiences and the things that the Bible talks about. I'm not going to give you a bunch of diagnosis things and a bunch of solutions. What I really want to do is just to encourage you guys, something that I think has been in Brian's heart for a while, and he has kind of put it into my mind. We really should be more real, more honest. He said something in a podcast with me and Alan, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago. So that's another area where I've been failing. But he said something in a podcast about one of the great things about confessing your faults to one another is that it helps you to understand I am like everybody else in the Christian family, and everybody else is like me. I'm not a terrible person. I'm not the worst person that's ever lived. Turns out we all got faults. We all have different kinds of faults. We all have different kinds of struggles. But many times because of this, what I call this myth of Christian perfection, we feel like we have to perpetuate that myth, and we have to pretend, nothing's wrong and everything is fine and everything's perfect. And that's just not really true. And so that's kind of along the lines of what I want to talk about today. But depression, what is depression? There's a lot of different definitions of it. I'll just tell you the way that I think about it. It is when the feeling of failure or something becomes low self-esteem, and then it becomes even perhaps worse than that, to where you feel worthless. You perhaps feel like there's no point in me doing any of this because this is meaningless, or you can even get to a point to where you feel like you can feel like your ministry is meaningless, you can feel like your life is meaningless, you can feel like your prayers is meaningless. You can really just lose direction. And I'm telling you, this has happened to great men in the Bible. And there are biblical answers. We're not going to have time to get into all that today. But that's really what I mean by depression. It's not just necessarily having a bad day. Some people even use the term chronic. I'm not going to use that term. But you may go through a week or 2 weeks or a month or maybe even a year where you really just feel like there's just no point to anything. And you feel like, and I'm part of the problem, or I am the problem. And it ends up, the reason it's an actual medical diagnosis is because it ends up causing a person to actually have less willpower, less will to do anything. They use the word dispirited. You literally lose energy. You can lose strength. You become very unproductive. And it's a condition. It's a condition. And along those lines, let me also say this. For some reason, I think again, because of this myth of that we're supposed to always be happy, people don't hesitate to ask prayer for a physical ailment for themselves or for someone else. They will ask prayer for someone who's sick, or someone who's fighting cancer, or it could be all kinds of things. They don't hesitate, but rarely ever, if ever, do you hear someone say, I need prayers for my mind. Rarely ever do we ask prayer for things that we are just struggling with in our mind, things that we're dealing with. And listen, mental battles can be worse than the flu. They can affect you worse. They can cause you to feel all kinds of things. They manifest themselves in all kinds of ways. And I'm not saying that everybody has the same issues, but I just know. I'm 42 now, and I have talked with enough people, and I've got enough life experience now to understand that most of what we probably really need some prayer on and personal encouragement on and stuff is actually the mental battles. The physical battles almost fight for themselves. Your body fights the viruses for you. But it's those mental things, those seeds of doubt, or those seeds of just being discouraged, down and out, lowly, all of those kinds of things. Those things you really need help on. Now, of course, don't let me take away from it. The greatest help that we're ever going to get is from God and from the Word of God. But even the Bible itself teaches us to encourage one another, and even to be forgiving, to forbear one another. I was thinking about the verse that says, if a brother be overtaken in a fault, you which are spiritual, restore him in meekness, considering yourselves, because you may fall also. And so the Bible does teach us to be open about these things, and we're just not, we don't really do a great job at it. So the Bible does not specifically ever use the word depression, but if you look up and understand all of its symptoms, the Bible does deal with all of the symptoms of depression. It uses words like heaviness, burdened down, continual sorrow, brokenhearted. It uses all of these kinds of words, and when you begin to actually read these accounts of things, you see that these people were struggling with depression. I'm just going to read for you. I'm going to read about 11 verses that will really kind of show you the depths of how far it can go with good people. You can turn there if you want to. You don't have to. I'm just going to read from Job chapter 3, starting at verse 1. Now, understandably, if there was ever a man that had a just cause to be depressed, surely it was Job. Surely it was Job. But I actually read through, I think, I want to say 11 or 12 chapters of Job just with these thoughts in mind and kind of examining it. And Job, honestly, his sadness turned to depression. Let me read this to you and you'll understand what I'm saying. Job chapter 3, verse 1. It says, "After this opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, There is a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful noise come therein." He's still talking about the day I was born. He's that depressed in a sense. "Let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. Let the stars of the twilight be dark. Let it look for light, but have none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day. Because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from my eyes." Listen. "Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly?" So this is more than sadness. This is more than just mourning. This is more than sorrow. He literally is saying, "Oh, that I were never born." Now, again, if any man ever had a justified reason to feel that way, we can relate, okay? But this account is here for a reason, and this is not the only one. I'm going to read a couple more to you in just a minute. But many of you may not feel any of this right now. Many of you may have never felt it, but some of you probably have. Have you ever woke up and thought, "Lord, why did you allow me to wake up today?" It can be the circumstances of life, or it can just be internal feelings that you're having. I know a person who recently told me, I'm going to say 3 weeks ago, that for months they would go to sleep and pray that they wouldn't wake up. And this is a good person. And that's touching. That's the kind of thing that we need help with. That's the kind of thing that we need to be honest with and find a wise counselor to help encourage us and strengthen us and help get us through these times. We're designed by God to be social creatures. They say if you take a deer and put it in a trap, this is why deer traps are illegal. If you trap a deer, it will just lay down and die. It will, because it's such a social animal. If it's separated from its small herd for more than 36 hours, it will literally, Even if you had food and water there for it, it won't eat or drink. It will just die. And so it's almost considered torture, and so deer traps are illegal. But humans, we share in that in a sense. We are like sheep. We are social creatures. And when someone is suffering alone, it's worse. In fact, loneliness is one of the reasons in the Bible that you find good Christian people in a condition of just feeling depressed, just feeling like, what's the point? I'm all alone. It can be loneliness in ministry. Elijah, in fact, that's one of the examples. Elijah, let me read this to you real fast. You'll know the account of Elijah. Elijah is honestly probably the most powerful as far as visible miracle work and power. He's probably the most powerful prophet in the Bible. Elijah actually also parted the waters twice. Maybe it was once. Maybe Elisha did it once and Elijah did it once. And Moses did it once. Of course, God did it all 3 times, but I'm saying Elijah had seen amazing things. Elijah had an amazing life. And it would be easy for us to think, man, you're such a man of God. You got the power of God with you everywhere you go. What are you so down about? And yet, loneliness is part of what caused him to feel down, and also the feeling of no success. We know the account, if you know about Elijah, and he went and he actually stood as a testament against the false prophets of Baal, and God answered his prayer and lapped up the fire and all this, or lapped up the water with the fire and all that. And then after that account, this is what it says. So they wanted to kill him because of that, and it says, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die. This is the day that God answered his prayer with fire from heaven. That day, when it didn't go how he thought it would, he just got down. I mean, way down. He actually went and just laid down under it, just giving up is really the illustration. He just went and laid under a juniper tree and just said, I was just ready to die. He says, requested for himself that he might die and said, it is enough now, O Lord. It is enough. Take away my life. He was a great man and had a extremely powerful ministry. And sure enough, God had called him to do it and empowered him to do it. This also makes me think of Paul. You know, Paul was called to do many great things. But along the way, I've said this before, just because God called you to do something don't mean it's going to be easy. If we think of everything Paul suffered, on his way to Iconium, he was in a shipwreck. And he spent 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the deep, is what he says. In other words, he's swimming for his life and hanging on the planks and boards. But the interesting thing is that it tells us that the Holy Spirit had spoke to Paul and sent him there. So he's actually on his way to do what God has told him to do. And in the meantime, is in the shipwreck. And that happened many times. He would be on his way to do what God had put upon his heart to do. He was carrying out his ministry for the Lord, and yet he faced challenges after challenge after challenge. Now, Paul doesn't ever say anything about specifically being depressed, but you can tell in 3 different chapters when he begins to defend himself that there were times where he definitely struggled and got down and felt defeated. And then there were times, Peter is another example. I'm just giving examples just to show you guys. This is not something to hide necessarily. If you've just felt like, man, I'm just useless for the Lord's sake at the very least. That's one of the reasons I say Christian is more prone to depression, is because we do have a higher calling. We almost have 2 identities. And spiritually, we can get down. We can feel like, man, I'm praying and it's not working, or I've been doing all of this and it's just not happening. And in our faith, we just want to kind of lay down under the juniper tree. But with Peter, Peter had the famous instance of his denial of Christ. And I know for sure he dealt with depression for at least a week to 2 after that, because of what's recorded. Christ, of course, is crucified, and Peter didn't show up for that. He was ashamed of himself. And he was very depressed. He was down about it. Yes, he just goes to fish, but he's basically just distracting himself from all of these emotions that he's feeling. He's just trying to occupy himself with something because he's very down. He feels worthless. He feels like a failure. There's no doubt about that. And then when Jesus calls a meeting of the apostles, he says, go and make sure Peter comes. Because he knew Peter wouldn't come. Because Peter don't feel like he belongs there. He feels like he's failed the Lord in such a way that's unrecoverable. And so Peter does come, and Christ shows him he still loves him, and that he still has a purpose. He still has a cause. He still has a meaning to his life. He still has a ministry. Get yourself together. I still love you. Let's pick it back up and get going. But these are just many examples of good men who dealt with, I say good men, it's men and women, who deal with this from many different angles at times. I even think about like mothers. In a sense, a mother has the highest calling there is. Because she's impacting, I think Lacey had talked about this the other day. She's impacting generations into the future, for Lord can only tell how much impact, because of what she has put into her children and what her children will put into their children and so on, and the children they meet and then they grow. I mean, a mother has a giant impact, and with giant responsibility becomes a giant sense of failure. You can feel like a failure as a mother or a father, but the greater the sense of duty that we have, the greater the ethic that we have, the greater the sense of morality that we have, the more often we can really struggle with feeling like we're just a failure. And the thing is, the more that voice of failure keeps resonating in your mind, it can hit a point to where rather than being a motivator, it becomes a demotivator, if that's a word. You just feel like, well, it's too late now. I've already let this go, or I've already done that, or they're already this age, and it can cause you to even sort of recede further down into a state of depression and remorse and guilt and all of the things that Christian people really do struggle with and feel. So it's not just men, it's men and women, and it can be for many different circumstances. And it's something that I really just, like I said, all I'm doing is trying to open the door for you guys, not right now necessarily, but to understand you're not alone. And it can be in all kinds of things. I know that, again, I'm going to use Brother Brian again because he's my friend, and I'm not betraying his trust or anything. He deals with post-traumatic stress, and it's a very real thing. And I don't even know all of the issues that he deals with over it. But he needs a friend. I mean, he has friends, but I'm saying he don't want to do this alone. And I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to do it alone either. He needs people that have also suffered the same thing, to be honest about what they struggle with. To be honest about the fact that maybe, there's times where you're just kind of checked out from reality, or maybe you have flashbacks or whatever, and to help him get through it. And we all as Christian people, as whether it be because of you're a father, maybe you need help in the sense of feeling like I'm lost, or I'm feeling worthless as a father, or I'm feeling worthless as a husband, or I'm feeling worthless as a wife, or as a mother, or whatever. These things we need to be a help and an encouragement and a strength to one another on. Let me give you one more example. This is from Psalm 42. And this is another cause of depression. It's a different category. But listen to what he says. As the hart, it's H-A-R-T, which is basically like a deer. As the hart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? He's actually asking that question not in a sense of heaven or judgment, but actually public worship. And you learn that as it goes. The temple that they had used to go and annually, or they would make monthly pilgrimages or whatever, and they would worship together publicly, and the temple had been destroyed, and this person is actually in captivity, and they're struggling. So he says, when shall I come and appear before God? Listen to this part. My tears have been my meat It's my food. My tears have been my meat day and night, while they continually say unto me, where is your God? So his tears are even crying tears in a sense. My tears are even saying to me, where is your God? He says, when I remember these things, I pour out my soul in me. For I had gone with the multitude. I went with them to the house of God with the voice of joy and praise, with the multitude that kept holy day. So he's saying, in former times, I had the joy of the Lord. We went and we made joyful noise and we was in praise and we went to the temple and we worshiped and things were good, and now it's like all that's gone. And maybe this person is even just saying, I ain't felt the Lord in a long time. I haven't felt the presence of God in my life a long time. I've even been going to church for a long time, but I feel virtually nothing there. It's just pure obligation. And he's longing after God. He's saying, where is my God? And he actually gets depressed about it, because he ends up saying this, why art thou cast down, O my soul? And why art thou disquieted within me? Hope in God. So he's trying to encourage himself. He's trying to get himself over this feeling that he's having. But I think it would be, if we can imagine with our minds seeing this man here do what he says, laying in the bed at night, crying himself to sleep, and feeling like, well, exactly what he says. Where is my God? He feels lost in a sense, and he's very down about it. He says, I'm cast down. My soul is cast down. My soul is disquieted within me. In other words, he's having these inner groanings, and he's very down about it. I know for sure, if you could read the rest of the chapter, I cut it short because I didn't want to stand up here and read all day. Not just this chapter. The next chapter, he starts off with the same way. Why am I cast down? He's trying to get himself out of this, basically. But my point is, my friends, just that it can happen. Now, there can be lots of causes. We've seen Elijah's cause. I didn't even go on and read it, but Elijah, so he sits down, he makes a request, Lord, just take my life. It's enough. I can't handle anymore. And then he makes 40 days journey to go to the mountain, and he's going for one reason alone, and that's to make his petition to God. And he gets there and he says, then it comes to light. What's causing this in you? And he says, Lord, I am alone. I'm alone. In what sense did he mean he was alone? He was alone in his ministry. He was walking it alone. And at a certain point, it became too much. He says, I've been very jealous for you, God. But I'm the only one. And I know that with men, sometimes that can happen. If you've got something that you feel like God has called you to do, and you're doing it, and rather than anything getting any better, it gets worse. And rather than anybody coming alongside to help you, they just abandon you. That can be a cause of depression. And then you can even start thinking, well, man, maybe the Lord didn't call me, Which the Lord answered to Elijah and said, Elijah, you're not alone. You're not alone. There's more. You just don't know them, but there's more out there. But there are many different causes. With Job, it was tragedy that turned into my life has no meaning. With the psalm writer, it was the feeling of being separate from God and the house of God and the people of God. And he just got very down about it. Those, in a sense, you could say are sort of, what would you say? I can't find the word, but admirable reasons for depression, maybe is the word. But there's other types of depression too. I don't have time to read to you the 51st Psalm, but go home and read it. David was depressed over sin. And I think for a lot of Christian people, that's probably one of the number one causes of depression. He was depressed over a past sin. He was depressed over the fact that he had fallen that far, and he just couldn't seem to shake it. He says things like, restore unto me joy. Wash me, clean me, make me whole. Renew a right spirit within me. He was down, understandably so. But let me just encourage you in this sense. We do hold ourselves to a high standard, and we should. But you're probably never going to actually make that standard. And if you do, then you probably have a new sin called self-righteousness. So along the way, don't feel like, my friends, even though people rarely will confess it or talk about it, everybody has a sin problem. Everybody does. It can be 1,000 different things for 1,000 different people, but everybody has something that they need to be working on, or they are working on and failing, or they're not working on. But everybody has something. Just because you've got something you're struggling with does not make you a bad person. In fact, the fact that you are even aware of it is at the very least a positive. Now, I always want to be careful with this stuff. I never intend to say, it's okay that you're a sinner. That's not my point. But I'll say, it's okay that you're not perfect. None of us are perfect. And if we would be a little bit more open and honest with each other, we would realize. And we would, the depression stuff that we would fight at times would be a little bit easier. And then suddenly what begins to happen is you begin to turn your attention on another person's problems and another person's battles and struggles, and you begin to be able to pray for other people more so than yourself, and they're praying for you. And together, like the Bible says, the threefold cord is not easily broken. Together, well, it even says if a man is alone and he falls, there's no one there to help him up. But if there's two, then there's somebody there to help him up. It's better. Two's better than one. Let's apply that to our battles. Two's better than one with your battle. In other words, if you're fighting a battle, get somebody along with you. I've even thought about, it may be that you may feel like a failure because you have a present sin and you don't even really have the desire to lay it down. So to say you're struggling with it would actually be wrong. Well, start there and pray that God would give you the desire to lay it down. Or ask someone else, pray for me that I will get conviction over this because I know that I need to lay it down, but it's just not in my heart right now to lay it down. Now, God forbid we would ever confess something like that. That's the way people think, but it's true for people. Past sins. That was actually David dealt with both, but I'm not up here to bash David, but the past sin issue or a past life. So many people live with shame of a past life. That's not you anymore. And in one sense, the fact that you've changed so much is a testimony. You don't really have to be ashamed of who you were before Christ, because that's who you were before Christ. But what if this is not even before Christ? What if this is the sin that you was saved? And then you committed a sin that you just regret for life? I understand that, but listen, don't let that become a reason to feel useless and worthless. God kept you alive for a reason. You still have a purpose. You still have a part in God's plan here. Do not let past sins take away your will and your strength and your desire to be active for the Lord. Don't let it make you feel like I'm not usable, I'm useless, I'm worthless, and God can do nothing with me. Oh, but preacher, you don't know what I've done. Well, I know what these guys did. And God still used them in a mighty way. Of course they repented, I'm not saying that. But listen, if you're having regret over past sin, that means you already have a heart of repentance. You wish you'd never failed like that. Don't let it beat you down forever, man. Don't let it. Pick yourself up and go on. Help somebody else who has struggled with that kind of thing. Now, I could go on and on and on with this, but I said I would keep it short, so I will. I want to conclude with this. You can't, until you're open and honest with yourself and other people, not only can you not receive help, but you can't be a help. And both are necessary. Now, I'm not saying just go pick random people and start telling them all your problems. A wise man seeks wise counsel. But do seek wise counsel. And it's like Brian said the other day. Just, shuck the corn down and tell the truth. Tell the truth. You can't help someone and you can't receive help until we're actually truthful with each other. And many times it just begins with the husband and wife. But it needs to begin somewhere And we need to have that we don't want to portray to our brothers and sisters, much less the world, that we're perfect and we have no issues and we have no problems and everything is just fine. And it's like this contagion. When a bunch of people begin to act that way, everybody else thinks they have to act that way to fit into that crowd. We all have to act like everything is perfect in life and I'm happy every day. But that's just not true. It's just not true. So I just want to encourage you guys. The Bible lays out there for us. Every single thing that I've talked to you about, I've got tons of verses and scriptural support on this. I don't believe that I've twisted any of it. People do struggle with mental battles, struggle with feeling like a failure, struggle with understanding even how to go about dealing with a certain sin or a certain situation, and they feel too embarrassed or ashamed to seek help with it because they feel like they will be judged and ridiculed. But I'll just tell you, if you come to me and ask me about some of these things, I'm in the boat with you. Okay, I'm not going to make you feel like, well, you are just a failure. I'm not going to. I'm in the boat with you. We've all got our issues, and we all need each other. We need each other's prayers, but we can't even know what to pray for until we open up about it. So I'm just going to stop there. I know that really wasn't like a big edifying sermon or anything. It was more about just kind of setting the stage where we can understand. We do need to be more honest about this stuff so that we can grow out of it, so that we can grow, so that we can have stronger relationships with the people of God and with God. So I'll leave it at that.